On the evening of the coronation, which would have been the 3rd of December, the Pope is getting ready for the next day, probably studying the liturgy and the ceremonial, and he hears a knock on his door. And quite literally, it's the Empress Josephine saying, Holy Father, I can't go ahead without telling you something terrible. And he says, when I married Napoleon, I only married him in a civil ceremony at the local town hall in Paris. So the Pope says, I can't crown people who in the eyes of the church are living as concubines. They're not actually married in the eyes of the church. So he says, you're going to have to get married. And Napoleon's furious. He says, I am married in the eyes of the law or whatever. But he says, well, I'm not crowning you tomorrow unless you get married, because you can divorce civilly, but in Catholicism, there's no divorce.
So Napoleon, that was also a tactical thing for Josephine then.
Oh, she was a clever woman in that. She realized that this gave her more stability as empress. And Napoleon also realized, because he knew enough about canon law, that this meant he couldn't get off the hook easily should he need to.